Most people think being the boss means having control, but Dr. Myles Munroe reveals why that mindset is actually a sign of psychological weakness. A boss relies on the fear of their authority, while a true leader masters the art of internal influence. Are you demanding labor or inspiring potential? Think about the most powerful person you've ever encountered in your life. Now ask yourself honestly, were they the most powerful because of what was written on their business card? Because of the floor they worked on? Because of the size of their office? Or was it something else? Something harder to name, something you felt before you could explain it. I want to talk to you today about one of the most misunderstood dynamics in the entire history of human civilization, the difference between a boss and a leader. And I want to be very clear before we go any further, these are not two versions of the same thing. They are not adjacent points on the same spectrum. They are fundamentally, philosophically, and psychologically opposite orientations toward other human beings. And the tragedy, the real tragedy, is that most of the people currently sitting in positions of authority have been handed the wrong map. They've been handed a map that tells them power flows downward through titles, through fear, through control. And they follow that map faithfully, and they arrive at a destination that feels like success, but is slowly bleeding the life out of the people around them. So today, I want to give you a different map. We're going to spend the next hour going deep, deeper than any management seminar, deeper than any motivational poster, and deeper than most leadership books dare to go. And we're going to dismantle, piece by piece, the illusions that keep managers stuck in the role of boss, while the title of leader remains permanently out of reach. We're going to cover 5 major ideas today. 1. The mirage of positional power, and why the moment you depend on your title to get things done, you've already lost. 2. The shift from control to contribution, and how transforming your internal psychology transforms every relationship you have at work. 3. Cultivating inherent purpose over quotas, and what it means to discover the unique gift inside every person on your team. 4. The law of divine governance in management, and why the most ancient principles of leadership are also the most relevant to the modern workplace. And 5. How to manifest a legacy of leadership, and what it looks like to build something that outlasts your presence in the building. Before we get into it, drop a comment right now. Tell me this, were you ever managed by someone who made you feel small? Or were you lucky enough to have a leader who made you feel unstoppable? I read every single comment, and I want to know your story. Let's begin. Part 1. The Mirage of Positional Power. Here's a question most people never think to ask. When does power actually begin? Not when does power get assigned, not when does power get granted. When does it actually begin? Because there's a version of power that's handed to you, and there's a version of power that you generate. And understanding the difference between those two is the entire foundation of what we're building today. Let's define our terms. Positional power is the authority that comes from the chair you sit in, the badge you wear, the org chart, the title at the bottom of your email signature. If you got promoted tomorrow, you'd have more of it. If you got fired tomorrow, you'd have none of it. It's borrowed, it's rented, and it is, without question, the weakest form of influence available to a human being in the modern workforce. Here's why that matters. Think about the last time you did something because someone told you to do it, not because you wanted to, not because it aligned with anything you cared about, but purely because you had no other choice. Because not doing it would cost you something, your job, your standing, your review. What happened to the quality of that work? What happened to your engagement with it? What happened to the invisible ingredient, the discretionary effort that separates people who do their job and people who elevate their job? It evaporated. And the person who gave you that instruction never even noticed the difference because they were too busy managing your behavior to pay attention to your spirit. This is the first great distinction we need to engrave on everything. A boss manages resources. A leader releases human potential. Read those two phrases again. The difference isn't subtle. It's not a matter of degree. A manager who sees people as resources is operating from a fundamentally different worldview than a leader who sees people as sources of potential waiting to be unlocked. When you see someone as a resource, you ask, how much can I get out of this? You calculate efficiency, you measure output, you manage performance like you'd manage inventory. And there's a certain short-term logic to it. It works, for a while, until the resentment builds, until the disengagement spreads like a slow infection through the team, until your best people, the ones with options, the ones who are talented enough to choose, quietly start looking for the door. But when you see someone as a source of potential, when you ask not what they can produce for you, but who they are becoming, and how this environment is either accelerating or stunting that growth, something completely different happens. People begin to expand into the space you've given them. They bring ideas you didn't ask for. They solve problems before they become your problems. They stay late not because they're afraid to leave, but because they care about what's being built. That is the difference. And let me be direct about something, because I know some of you listening to this right now are managing teams. Maybe you're managing large organizations, and part of you is thinking, sure, that sounds nice, but I'm accountable to results. I have quotas, I have targets, I have a board. I can't just go around nurturing potential all day. I hear you, and I want to challenge that assumption directly. There is a mountain of research, decades of it, across industries, across cultures, that demonstrates beyond any serious debate that teams led by leaders who prioritize psychological safety, belonging, and purpose outperform teams managed by fear. Not slightly, significantly. Google's Project Aristotle, Gallup's decades of employee engagement data, the work of researchers like Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School. Over and over again, the same finding. How you lead is the primary driver of what your team produces. Not what you demand, not what you threaten, how you lead. So the choice isn't between being a caring leader and being a high-performing one. The choice is between a strategy that produces compliance and a strategy that produces commitment. And commitment outperforms compliance every time it gets the room. Now let's talk about fear. Because this is where a lot of leaders go wrong, and most of them genuinely don't know they're doing it. The psychological trap of fear-based management is seductive because it's fast. Fear is a shortcut. When you want something done immediately, the fastest way to get it done is to make the cost of not doing it feel large. A threat, an implication, a raised voice, a performance review with teeth. People respond, people comply, and the manager looks at the result and thinks, well, that worked. But what actually happened in that moment? Neuroscience has a very precise answer. When a human being perceives a threat, the amygdala activates the fight or flight response. Stress hormones flood the system, and the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for creativity, problem-solving, complex reasoning, and innovation, goes offline. Read that slowly. Fear turns off the very brain you need most. The moment you use fear to manage someone, you have surgically removed their capacity to think creatively and strategically on your behalf. So you get compliance, you get obedience, you get people who do exactly what they're told and nothing more. And that might be fine if you're running an assembly line in 1955, but in an economy built on knowledge work, on innovation, on creativity and adaptability, fear is not a management strategy. It's self-sabotage at the organizational level. And there's something even more insidious happening beneath the surface. People who are managed through fear don't just disengage from their work, they disengage from their manager. They start managing up, spending enormous amounts of mental energy figuring out how to look productive, how to avoid being blamed, how to survive the environment rather than thrive in it. And every ounce of energy that goes into self-protection is an ounce of energy not going into the actual work. Quick question, and I genuinely want to know this. Have you ever been that person? Have you ever spent more energy managing your manager's perception of you than actually doing your best work? Drop a yes or a no in the comments right now. I promise you the answers will be illuminating. The research is consistent on this. The number one reason people leave organizations isn't pay, it's not commute time, it's not even culture in the broad sense, it's their direct manager. Their immediate experience of authority is the determining factor in whether they stay or whether they go. Which means that the boss who thinks they're keeping their team in line through fear is actually writing resignation letters for their best people. They're just the last to know it. Here's the bottom line of part 1, and I want you to really let this land. Your title is a door. Your character is the building. The door might get you inside, but it has nothing to do with whether the place is worth being in. Positional power is a starting point, not a strategy. It gives you an audience, it doesn't give you influence. Real influence, the kind that moves people, that inspires discretionary effort, that makes someone stay an extra hour because they believe in what you're building, that has nothing to do with the nameplate on your door. Part 2. The shift from control to contribution. There's a question I want you to sit with before we go further. What is your primary goal when you walk into work? Not the official goal, not the goal on your performance review, your actual goal. The one that drives your moment-to-moment decisions, the one that filters how you see people, how you respond to challenges, how you interpret the behavior of those around you. Because here's what I've observed across decades of watching organizations. Most managers, if they're being honest, are primarily motivated by one of two things. Either they want to be important, they want to feel significant, respected, deferred to, in control, or they want to be useful. And those are not the same motivation. They are not even close. The manager who wants to be important is obsessed with the external. How do I look? Who's listening to me? Do people take me seriously? Am I being respected? Their primary concern is the gap between who they are and who they want people to think they are, and they spend enormous amounts of psychological energy managing that gap. This produces a very specific leadership style. These are the managers who take credit for their team's wins and distribute blame for their team's losses. These are the leaders who are threatened by smart people on their teams, because smart people are a challenge to the carefully constructed image of being the most important person in the room. These are the executives who make decisions based on how those decisions reflect on them personally, rather than on what actually serves the organization. And you know what's deeply ironic about this? In trying so hard to seem important, they guarantee they will never actually become important. Because real importance, the lasting kind, the kind that gets spoken about in hushed tones long after someone has left the building, is never the product of self-interest. It is always, without exception, the byproduct of genuine service. Now let's talk about the leader who wants to be useful. This is a fundamentally different internal orientation. This person walks into a room asking, "How can I help? What does this situation need from me right now? What does this person in front of me need in order to do their best work? What is standing between my team and their potential, and how do I remove it?" This is not a passive orientation. This is one of the most psychologically demanding stances a human being can adopt in a professional setting, because it requires you to consistently subordinate your own ego needs, your need to be seen, recognized, validated, to the actual needs of the people and mission you serve. And our egos are strong. They don't go quietly. But here's what happens when a leader genuinely makes this shift. The dynamic in the room changes immediately. People feel it. Human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to authenticity. We can tell within moments whether someone is performing care or actually caring. And when the care is real, something relaxes. People stop performing. They stop managing up. They start showing up as themselves. And that is when the real work begins. Let me tell you about a concept that I find deeply useful here. the idea of the transformed mind versus the transactional mind in leadership. The transactional mind operates on a simple calculation. I give you a salary, you give me your labor. I give you the policy, you give me your compliance. I give you the structure, you fill it with your hours. Every interaction is fundamentally an exchange, and the leader's job is to make sure they're getting the better end of every exchange. The transformed mind operates on a completely different premise. It says, the people on this team are not here to serve my ambition. I am here to serve their potential. My job is to create the conditions under which they can become more of who they are capable of being. And if I do that job well, if I genuinely commit to that orientation, the results will speak for themselves. Now, I want to push on something here because I think the word transformation sometimes gets treated as a spiritual concept rather than a psychological one. And while we will touch on spiritual dimensions later in this conversation, I want to make clear that what we're describing here has very practical psychological mechanisms. When a leader consistently communicates to their team that they are seen, valued, and trusted, not as interchangeable parts of a machine, but as individual human beings with unique gifts, several things happen. First, commitment rises. Because people are not just working for a paycheck anymore, they're working for the affirmation that they matter. And that affirmation, given authentically, is one of the most powerful motivators known to psychology. Second, accountability becomes internal. One of the great paradoxes of leadership is that the leaders who try hardest to enforce accountability are often the ones who have the least of it on their teams. Because external accountability, the kind backed by fear of consequences, only functions when someone is watching. Internal accountability, the kind that comes from genuine ownership of a mission, functions even when no one is watching. And you cannot install internal accountability in someone through threat. You can only cultivate it through trust. Third, and this is the one that most surprises managers who make this shift, your own job becomes easier. Dramatically easier. Think about what management looks like when it's primarily about control. Every decision gets escalated to you because your team has learned that making autonomous decisions is risky. Every problem becomes your problem because solving problems independently requires authority that fear-based culture never distributes. Every project requires your direct oversight because trust has never been built to the level where oversight can be released. You become a bottleneck. You become the ceiling through which nothing in the organization can grow faster than your own personal capacity. Now, contrast that with what happens when contribution replaces control as the primary orientation. Your team brings you solutions rather than problems. They make decisions at the level closest to the information, which is almost always the right level. They feel the ownership of a mission, not the weight of a job. And you? You get to do the work that actually matters, the work of vision, the work of strategy, the work of developing people, the work that is genuinely impossible to delegate because it requires your specific wisdom and perspective. This is the promise of the shift from control to contribution. Not just a better team, not just a healthier culture, a fundamentally more intelligent organization, one that thinks better, moves faster, and adapts more successfully than any command and control structure can match. Now, let me give you the practical architecture of this shift, because I don't want to be the kind of voice that tells you why something matters without telling you how to begin. The shift from control to contribution begins in a place that has nothing to do with your team. It begins in your relationship with your own psychology. Specifically, it begins with the question, why do I need control? For most managers, control is a response to anxiety. The underlying fear is, if I'm not watching, if I'm not directing, if I'm not in charge, something will go wrong and it will be my fault. Control is a coping mechanism. It's how a certain personality type manages the feeling of being responsible for outcomes they can't fully predict. And here's where I'd love your reflection, because this is real and human, and I know it applies to many people watching. Have you ever realized that your need to control a situation had more to do with your own anxiety than any actual risk in the environment? Drop that in the comments. Seriously. Because the leaders who can answer yes to that question are already halfway to where we need to go. The antidote to control anxiety is not pretending the anxiety doesn't exist. It's building the internal and external structures that make control unnecessary. On the internal side, that means developing the genuine belief that your people are capable. Not just saying it, not putting it on a slide at the annual kickoff, actually believing it. Actually trusting that when you hire intelligent adults and give them clear direction and genuine autonomy, they will not run the thing off a cliff. On the external side, that means creating systems of communication and accountability that make oversight possible without requiring micromanagement. Clear goals, shared openly, regular check-ins that are genuinely about support rather than surveillance, a culture where people voluntarily surface problems early because they've learned that problems are welcomed, not punished. This is the architecture of a team that runs on contribution rather than control. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it always begins with the decision of the person at the top. Part 3. Cultivating inherent purpose over quotas. Here's something I want you to consider. Every person on your team right now has something about them that is singular, irreplaceable. Something in their wiring, their intuition, their way of seeing problems, their particular kind of intelligence that is not duplicated anywhere else in your organization. Do you know what it is? Not what their job description says. Not what their resume claims. What is the thing, the unique gift that this specific human being brings to a room? Because if you can't answer that question for every person you lead, then you are not leading them yet. You are employing them, which is a much smaller thing. Let's talk about the difference between managing to quotas and cultivating inherent purpose. Because this is the point in the conversation where we move from theory to something genuinely transformational. Quotas are not inherently wrong. Targets matter. Accountability matters. An organization without any shared metrics for success is a charity with no compass. I am not here to argue that measurable outcomes don't matter. But here's the question. What are quotas for? Most managers treat quotas as ends in themselves. Hit the number, make the target, exceed the expectation. And there is a short-term logic to this that I understand. But consider what happens psychologically when a human being's worth is measured entirely by whether they hit a number. First, they stop trusting their instincts, because instincts are not metrics. Insight is not a metric. Relationships are not a metric. All of those powerful human capacities that are actually responsible for sustainable success get systematically devalued because they don't fit neatly on a spreadsheet. Second, they start to optimize for the metric rather than for the underlying goal the metric was supposed to represent. This is one of the most well-documented phenomena in organizational psychology, Goodhart's law, as it's often called. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. People find ways to hit the number that don't actually serve the mission. And over time, the organization discovers it's been measuring the wrong thing all along. Third, and most tragically, people lose the plot. They forget why they got into this work in the first place. The doctor who wanted to heal people gets swallowed by billing codes. The teacher who wanted to transform young minds gets buried in standardized test scores. The salesperson who loved the craft of building genuine relationships gets reduced to a daily call count. The quota becomes the cage. Real leadership does something completely different. Real leadership asks, why did this person choose this work? What does it mean to them beyond the paycheck? What would they do with it if no one was measuring? And then it builds the conditions under which that version of the person, the purposeful one, the engaged one, the one who cares, gets to show up every day. This is not soft leadership. This is not being nice. This is the most sophisticated talent strategy available to any organization, because purpose is the multiplier. Purpose is what turns competence into excellence, and excellence into legacy. Let me give you the psychological mechanics of this, because it's important to understand why purpose is so powerful, not just that it is. Self-determination theory, one of the most robust frameworks in motivational psychology, identifies three core psychological needs that, when met, produce intrinsic motivation. Autonomy, the sense that you are the author of your own actions. Competence, the sense that you are growing and getting better at something that matters. And relatedness, the sense that you belong to something and to people you care about. Now, how many of those three needs does a quota address? If you said 0, you're paying attention. Quotas are extrinsic motivators. They come from outside the person. And while extrinsic motivators can reliably produce short-term compliance, research consistently shows, most famously in Edward Deshie's experiments going back to the 1970s, that extrinsic rewards, particularly contingent rewards, actually undermine intrinsic motivation over time. This is counterintuitive, but extremely well established. When you attach an external reward to something a person was already intrinsically motivated to do, their intrinsic motivation decreases. They start to see the activity as something they do for the reward, rather than something they do because it matters. The implications for leadership are profound. When your primary management tool is the carrot and the stick, bonus for performance, penalty for underperformance, you are not motivating your team. You are systematically dismantling whatever genuine motivation they arrived with. What does cultivating purpose look like in practice? It starts with a conversation most managers have never had. Not the performance review, not the goal-setting session. A conversation that begins with a question that most people have never been asked by their manager. What is the work that makes you lose track of time? What are the kinds of problems that when they walk through your door, you feel genuinely lit up by? What is it about this work, not the job, the work, that connects to something you actually care about? These are not small talk questions. These are the questions that reveal the architecture of a person's purpose. And when a leader actually knows the answer, when they know what this person's version of meaningful work looks like and feels like, they can make decisions that connect that person's daily tasks to something larger than a quota. And the magic? When people experience their work as purposeful, as connected to something they genuinely care about, they don't need to be managed toward performance. Performance becomes the natural output of engagement. Now I want to talk about one of the most profound ideas in all of leadership literature, and one that is, ironically, almost never discussed. True leadership is the art of making yourself unnecessary. Let that sit for a moment, because it runs completely counter to everything that the positional power mindset is built on. The boss mindset is built on being needed, on being the essential person, on nothing being able to happen without your sign-off, your direction, your presence. The leader mindset is the precise opposite. The leader's highest achievement is building a team, a culture, a system of values and capabilities so robust that leadership functions even in the leader's absence. Think about the great leaders in history, in organizations, in communities, in movements. The measure of their greatness is not how indispensable they were while they were present. It is what survived them, what continued without them, what they built that was stronger than any one person. This is the paradox of leadership. The more power you give away, the more powerful you become. The more you invest in the capability of others, the more capable your organization becomes. The more unnecessary you make yourself, the more truly necessary your leadership becomes. Because the only leader who can afford to make themselves unnecessary is one who is operating from something other than ego. And that brings us directly to the connection between self-discovery and the ability to lead without fear. The leaders who are the most threatened by capable people on their teams are the leaders who have the most unresolved questions about their own worth. They rely on others' incompetence to feel valuable. They need to be the smartest person in the room because they're not sure who they are when they're not. The leaders who actively develop and promote people who might surpass them are the leaders who have done the deeper work, who have found their identity not in their title or their comparative ranking, but in the clarity of their values, the authenticity of their character, and the quality of their contribution. This is why self-knowledge is not a personal luxury for leaders, it is a professional necessity. The unexplored self is the most dangerous variable in any organizational equation. The leader who doesn't know their own blind spots doesn't just make bad decisions, they create systems that perpetuate their blind spots, cultures that reinforce their limiting beliefs, teams that are shaped by fears they can't even name. So here's my question for the comments. Who do you know, or have you ever known, who made you better simply by believing in you? Who saw something in you that you hadn't fully seen in yourself yet? Tell me about that person, because I think those stories are some of the most important stories we have. Part 4. The Law of Divine Governance in Management. I want to take us somewhere unexpected now. Somewhere that might surprise you, given that this is a conversation about management and leadership. But I believe it's the most important part of everything we're going to discuss today. I want to talk about ancient wisdom. Specifically, I want to talk about what the oldest traditions of human thought have to say about leadership, and why those ancient principles map onto the psychological demands of high-level modern management with an almost alarming precision. Across virtually every ancient tradition, from the Hebrew and Greek texts to the writings of the Stoics to the philosophical foundations of Eastern leadership thought to the governance philosophies of indigenous civilizations around the world, there is a concept so consistent that it almost demands we take it seriously. That concept is stewardship. Not ownership, not authority. Stewardship. The distinction is everything. An owner says, "This is mine. I built it, I control it, I can do with it what I will." An owner's orientation is fundamentally possessive and extractive. What can I take from this? What can I squeeze from this? A steward says, "This has been entrusted to me. I did not create it. I will not be the last to touch it. My obligation is not to extract from it, but to return it better than I found it." The stewardship model of leadership changes everything about how a leader relates to the people under their care. Your team members didn't come from you. Their gifts, their intelligence, their creativity, their drive, none of that belongs to you. You didn't produce it. You can't own it. You can only steward it. You can either create an environment in which those gifts flourish and grow, or you can create an environment in which they wither and eventually leave to find better soil somewhere else. And that reframe, from my team to my responsibility, is one of the most powerful psychological shifts a leader can make. Let me connect this to something very specific in the ancient Hebrew leadership tradition that I find extraordinarily relevant to modern organizational leadership. There is a concept in that tradition used to describe the relationship between a king and his people that translates roughly as the one who goes before to prepare the way. Not the one who stands at the back and drives people forward, not the one who sits at the top and delegates downward. The one who goes before, who enters the difficult territory first, who clears the obstacles, who prepares the environment so that those who follow can move faster and more freely than they otherwise could. This is a portrait of servant leadership that is not soft, not passive, not naive. It is profoundly demanding, because it asks the leader to be the first one into the hard conversations, the first one into the difficult decisions, the first one to admit uncertainty, model vulnerability, demonstrate the kind of character that asks people to follow, not because they have to, but because they trust where you're going. In the Stoic tradition, that body of Greek and Roman philosophy that has experienced something of a renaissance in modern leadership literature, there is a similar idea. The Stoics believed that the only legitimate source of influence was virtue, character, not position, not title, not wealth. The leader who could not govern themselves could not govern others. The leader whose passions were in control of their reason was unfit for responsibility over the passions of others. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in the ancient world, emperor of Rome, spent his private journals not congratulating himself on his power, but relentlessly interrogating his own character, holding himself to standards that he fully acknowledged he regularly fell short of. That practice, that discipline of honest self-examination in the context of power is one of the rarest and most valuable things a leader can cultivate. Because power, as every tradition and every psychology agrees, is the thing most likely to corrupt the character it's supposed to test. Power makes it easier to avoid accountability, easier to believe your own narrative, easier to surround yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear. The only antidote to the corruption of power is the deliberate practice of the opposite, surrounding yourself with people who will tell you the truth, seeking out the disconfirming evidence, maintaining a rigorous practice of self-honesty that refuses to let status become an excuse for stagnation. Now, let me bring this ancient wisdom into the very specific mechanics of modern organizational influence. The hierarchy model of influence says authority flows from title. The higher your position, the more influence you have, and you secure that influence by maintaining the distance between yourself and those below you, the distance that makes authority legible and hierarchy functional. But we're living through one of the great organizational transitions in the history of work. Flat organizations, remote teams, cross-functional collaboration, knowledge work that resists the traditional logic of top-down command. The hierarchy model is not just psychologically limited, it's increasingly impractical as an operational model. The character model of influence says something completely different. It says authority flows from trust, and trust flows from character, and character is demonstrated through behavior, specifically through the consistent alignment between what you say and what you do, between the values you profess and the decisions you make, between the treatment you ask people to extend to each other and the treatment you extend to them. Character-based influence has something that positional influence will never have. It survives the removal of the position. Think about the leaders in your life who have influenced you most deeply. If they lost their title tomorrow, if they were no longer in any formal position of authority over you, would you still follow them? Would you still seek their advice? Would you still value their opinion? If the answer is yes, if the influence is genuinely separable from the title, then you are thinking of someone with character-based authority, and that is the only kind worth building. How is character-based influence built? Let me give you the specific mechanisms because I think this is where philosophy needs to become practice. First, consistency over time. Character is not demonstrated in a single dramatic moment. It is built through 10,000 small moments, through how you respond when you're tired, when you're under pressure, when the decision is difficult and the right answer is inconvenient. People are watching all the time, and they are building a model of who you actually are based not on your best day, but on your most reliable day. Second, honesty that includes yourself. Leaders with genuine character are willing to be publicly wrong. They say, "I don't know," when they don't know. They acknowledge mistakes without defensive storytelling. They attribute credit precisely to the people who actually earned it. This is not weakness. In a world where everyone is performing certainty and authority, the leader who voluntarily exposes uncertainty is doing something paradoxically powerful. They are making themselves trustworthy. Because if you're willing to be wrong about this, I can trust that you're being straight with me about the other things. Third, service that costs something. A leader who only serves in comfortable ways isn't actually serving. They're managing their image. Real service in leadership means absorbing friction so your team doesn't have to. It means fighting the battles upward that protect your people's ability to do their work. It means telling uncomfortable truths to power even when the risk to yourself is real. This is the ancient concept made modern, the steward who protects the environment for others to thrive, not by eliminating all difficulty is where growth happens, but by ensuring that the difficulties people face are the productive kind, the ones that stretch and develop, rather than the destructive kind, the ones that demoralize and erode. Fourth, and this may be the most important, interest in the individual above their function. The leader who knows their team members' professional goals is doing the basics. The leader who knows their team members' personal hopes, genuine fears, and the story of who they're becoming, that leader has crossed from management into something more like mentorship, more like kinship. And the loyalty that generates is not the loyalty of obligation, it's the loyalty of genuine relationship. And that is essentially unbreakable. I want to hear from you on this one. What is one thing a leader has done for you, something that cost them something, that went beyond their job description, that you've never forgotten? Because those are the moments that define what leadership actually means. Share it in the comments. Those stories deserve to be told. And here's the deep truth that ties all of this together. The leader who governs from character, who leads from a place of stewardship, service, and genuine care, does not need to take authority from anyone. They generate it continuously. Every interaction becomes a deposit in a trust account that produces returns in the form of discretionary effort, genuine loyalty, and the kind of organizational health that outlasts any individual tenure. This is not management theory. This is ancient wisdom dressed in a modern suit. The principle has not changed in 10,000 years. The leader who serves the people earns the right to lead the people, and the people who feel genuinely served will follow, freely, fully, with everything they have. Part 5. Manifesting a legacy of leadership. We've been building towards something, and I want to name it clearly before we close this conversation together. Everything we've discussed, the mirage of positional power, the shift from control to contribution, the cultivation of purpose, the ancient laws of servant governance, all of it is pointing toward one fundamental question. What do you want to leave behind? Not what do you want to achieve, not what do you want to earn, not what do you want to be known for in the moment. What do you want to leave behind? Legacy is not built in the boardroom. It's not built in the performance review. It's not built in the memo or the all-hands meeting or the annual report. Legacy is built in every single micro-interaction between a leader and the people they lead. Every conversation, every decision, every moment in which you had the choice to choose fear over trust, control over contribution, ego over service, and you chose differently. Those moments accumulate over years, over careers, over the arc of an organizational culture, and they produce something either very small or very large. They produce either a team that never quite reaches its potential because it was always being held in the fist of someone who needed to feel important, or they produce something extraordinary. People who become more capable, more confident, more themselves because of the time they spent in your orbit. Let me give you the roadmap, the actual practical psychological roadmap for transitioning from a supervisor to a visionary source of life. Because you deserve something concrete to walk out of this conversation with. Stage 1. The audit of ego. Before anything else can change, you need to honestly answer the question, how much of my current leadership behavior is driven by my ego, by my need to be right, to be respected, to feel in control? Not to punish yourself for the answer, but to see it clearly, because you cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. And the leaders who are the most resistant to this question are the ones who need it most. The audit of ego is not a one-time event, it's a daily practice. Ask yourself each morning, am I walking in today to serve or to be seen? Am I making this decision for the organization or for my image? Am I threatened by this person's capability or genuinely excited by it? Stage 2. The individual investment. Pick one person on your team, one, and decide to genuinely know them. Not their performance metrics, but them, their aspirations, their creative frustrations, the gap between what they're doing now and what they believe they could do. Then do one specific thing this week that moves them closer to the version of themselves they most want to become. And then do it for the next person and the next. Over time, this is not a nice gesture. This is organizational transformation at the cellular level. Stage 3, the language shift. Pay attention to how you speak. Specifically, how often do you say I and how often do you say we? How often do you talk about what you want and how often do you talk about what the mission needs? Language is not decoration. Language is the architecture of culture. The words leaders use regularly become the words their teams think with. And a team that thinks collectively, that has internalized the we of a shared mission, performs at a categorically different level than a team that has learned that success is primarily a solo competition. Stage 4, the decision of transparency. The next time you're uncertain about a direction, and you will be, because leadership in complexity always involves uncertainty, consider sharing that uncertainty with your team rather than concealing it. Not to undermine confidence, not to create anxiety, but to model the thing that makes genuine cultures possible. The idea that not knowing is acceptable, that admitting it is strong, and that the collective intelligence of the group is almost always superior to the private intelligence of any single person, including and especially the leader. Stage 5, the long game. Ask yourself one question every quarter. Not, did we hit the numbers? Not, how is the revenue? Ask, are the people on my team better, more capable, more confident, more themselves than they were 90 days ago? Because if the answer is yes, consistently, every quarter over years, if the people who spend time with you are systematically becoming more of who they were meant to be, then you have done something that no quota can measure and no performance review can capture. You have led. Let me bring this home. There is a concept in organizational development called psychological safety, the shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, that it's okay to speak up, to disagree, to make mistakes, to bring a new idea into the room without fear of humiliation or punishment. Google's Project Aristotle, the largest study ever conducted on team effectiveness, found that psychological safety was the single most important predictor of team performance, more than intelligence, more than experience, more than technical skill, more than any individual talent in the room. The teams that were most psychologically safe outperformed everyone else. And psychological safety does not emerge from a policy. It does not emerge from a training program. It only emerges from the consistent behavior of the leader, from whether the leader in the moments that matter chooses to make the room safer or more dangerous for human expression. Your behavior is the policy. Your character is the culture. Every single day, you are setting the standard, whether you mean to or not, whether you're thinking about it or not. The way you respond to failure, the way you handle disagreement, the way you treat the least powerful person in the room, the way you behave when you're under pressure and no one has given you a script. All of it accumulates into a culture, into a climate, into an environment in which people either flourish or diminish. And that environment is your legacy, not your revenue, not your title, not your performance reviews. Your legacy is what it felt like to work with you. Whether people felt seen, whether people felt trusted, whether people became more capable, more themselves, more fully alive in the time they spent in your presence. That is the standard. And it is not an easy standard. I won't pretend it is. It asks you to lead from a place of genuine security rather than ego defense. It asks you to find your identity not in your position, but in your values. It asks you to measure your success not by what you've accumulated, but by what you've cultivated. It asks you to be accountable to a standard that has nothing to do with market cycles or quarterly reports. A standard that asks simply, did you make people better? And when you walk out of your career, when the nameplate is taken off the desk, when the title is no longer returned on the email thread, that question, and only that question, will determine whether what you built was a temporary arrangement of power or a lasting contribution to the human story. The door swings open in front of you. The work is not finished, it is never finished, but the direction is clear. Stop demanding obedience. Command respect through integrity. Stop managing behavior. Develop the person. Stop measuring your worth by your title. Build it in the testimony of the people you serve. Because the world doesn't need more bosses. The world has plenty of those. The world needs more leaders. People who understand that genuine power is generated through service, that real influence comes from character, and that the greatest legacy any of us can leave is a trail of people who became more fully themselves because we chose to lead them well. That work starts today. It starts in the next conversation. It starts in the next decision. It starts the moment you choose the harder, truer, more demanding path of leadership over the easier, emptier shortcut of the boss. Start now. If something in this video landed for you today, if even one idea shifted something in the way you see yourself or the people you lead, then do me one favor. Hit subscribe. Because everything we do on this channel is built for exactly this. Conversations that go deeper, think harder, and refuse to give you the easy answer when the true answer is available. And leave me a comment. Tell me the idea that hit hardest today. Tell me about the leader who changed your life. Tell me about the boss you survived and what it cost you. Because I read every single one, and those conversations are the reason this channel exists. Until then, lead with purpose. Lead with humility. Lead like the people in front of you are the most important work of your life. Because they are. See you next time.